Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the At the Water's Edge podcast, where we look for insights beyond the headlines to take a practitioner's view on national security and geopolitics. It's the 27th of March, 2024. Let's get started. Now, today, we've got quite an interesting topic. We're going to be talking about innovation, one of the most overly used buzzwords out there in the media today. Innovation. Specifically, how innovation is a tool of national security and national power. Now, America prides itself on being one of the most entrepreneurial, forward-thinking, innovative, and dynamic countries and economies in the world. It is a great source of national pride and national power. It's always talked about as a positive thing. We need innovators, we need leaders, we need entrepreneurs. But what is innovation? And can you have too much of a good thing? Is innovation some sort of weird Pandora's box that once you let it out, you can't put it back in and it makes the world a worse place? Or is it both? Like every tool. It depends on how you use it. Well, we're going to look at this, and we're going to look at how both we and our allies have used innovation historically as a tool of national power, and now that compares to what some of our competitors out there, looking at you, China, have used it to gain advantage over us or to play catch up on the cheap. Now, to help us look into this, we've got a wonderful guest on today, Dr. Leo Blanken, who is a professor at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California, and a fellow at the Irregular Warfare Initiative. Both wonderful programs. You should go check them out. Now, Dr. Blanken teaches innovation professionally and works extensively with the special operations community. Most of his students actually come from either American or foreign special operations, and looks at how innovation can be used to solve problems, how organizations can optimize their ability to innovate. How can a large bureaucratic organization like the military actually do something that is countercultural to almost everything else it does and allow novelty and adaptation to happen both from the top down and from the bottom up? Really looking forward to having this conversation with him and sharing it with you. With that, let's get to our conversation with Dr. Blanken. And we're live. Leo, good morning, sir, and welcome to the podcast. How you doing today?
Great. Thanks for having me, Scott.
Really looking forward to this conversation. I stumbled across one of your articles on LinkedIn, actually, talking about innovation and national security. And I have to admit, as a former Army guy, I actually rolled my eyes when I first saw it, because I'm like, what is this, buzzword-laden thing I'm about to plow into? But you actually had a really interesting take on how national security, or how innovation is a tool of national security that I wanted to dive into with you. But before we start jumping on that, could you introduce yourself to the audience and your own background in national security topics?
Absolutely. So first off, I have to say the views I present here today are my own and do not represent policy or position of the Department of Defense, Department of the Navy, or the Naval Postgraduate School. So my name's Leo Blanken. I'm an associate professor of defense analysis at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, California. Our department focuses on special operations and low-intensity conflict. And I've been there for about 12 years, and I am for better or for worse, a political scientist.
Awesome. And can you explain to people what the Naval Postgraduate School is? Most folks have never heard of it.
Yes, and that's not a surprise. Most folks have not heard of it. So the Naval Postgraduate School is a graduate degree granting institution that is owned by the United States Navy. It has about 70 degree granting programs focusing on hard sciences, applied sciences, engineering, and some social sciences. And it confers masters and PhDs, and it's accredited through WASC, the Western Association of Schools and Colleges, just like Stanford or UCLA, et cetera. And it's kind of an unknown entity. A lot of times when I say I'm from the Naval Postgraduate School, people assume that I'm from the Naval War College, et cetera. But it's a joint institution. Our department, about 25% of our students are foreign special operations professionals. So it's a small but really vibrant institution.
One really cool thing about it is that it does have a huge relationship to the special operations community, which doesn't necessarily jump out at you when you hear Naval War College or Naval Postgraduate School. But can you describe what the relationship between the Naval Postgraduate School and the special operations community is?
Sure. It really is hubbed out of our department, Defense Analysis. And actually, our department was co-founded by Admiral McRaven when he was a graduate student at NPS back in the early 90s. So our department was co-founded by Bill McRaven and Gordon McCormick, and also John Arquilla was there at the beginning. And it's a small department focused heavily on serving the needs of SOCOM, Special Operations Command. So we have students from all of the soft components, and like I said, a large number of foreign soft professionals from around the world.
Awesome. Well, let's start getting to this question of innovation. You describe innovation as not just a buzzword, but actually a tool of national security. And you pointed out in some of your writing some issues with how America approaches its innovation strategy or lack thereof. But could you walk us through what is innovation as a tool of national security?
Sure. Innovation, as you said, and a lot of my writings, I point out that innovation has become a pretty painful buzzword for people to hear. And you know, the definition I use around innovation essentially is derived from Joseph Schumpeter. Just talking about innovation is doing things differently for competitive advantage. And so if you think about the military and what it does, it's always innovating. Militaries always have to innovate as the strategic landscape changes, as technology changes. Militaries are constantly dynamically changing. So that's always true. So then why is innovation such a huge emphasis now, such a huge buzzword? Because the strategic landscape is changing very rapidly right now with the rise of peer competitors. And at the same time, you have this rapidly changing technology landscape as well. So because of that, and the fact that the U.S. military is coming out of 20 years of the global war on terror, a lot of innovation, a lot of change needs to be done. And you can call that innovation, adaptation, learning, transformation, whatever words you want to put around it. The U.S. military has got to change rapidly right now.
What mechanisms does the military have to actually foster and incubate innovation? How does it identify where to start? What types of innovation does it need? And what are the mechanisms? Because very cynically, I can say that the military only tends to learn through colossal failure. So how do we innovate prior to the point of failure?
So I think you're right, and I think we need to put that on your characterization in a little bit of historic context. So during the Cold War, the United States innovated really well, and there were some reasons for that. The Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of Defense in the 1960s spent roughly 1/3 of all R&D money around the world was spent by the U.S. DoD. So it was using its money, using its purchasing power to drive innovation, to drive change. And it was doing so in a contestation with the Soviet Union, which was a well-understood opponent that was basically a mirror image of us. And so during the Cold War, the United States built this hyper-centralized, hyper-vertical, hierarchically organized innovation system that did quite well during the Cold War. Came up with the second offset, produced precision-guided munitions, stealth, these orchestrated series of technological innovations that solved very profound strategic problems, operational problems around the fold the gap, etc. So its innovation, or its organization for innovation, was very vertical, hierarchical, and centralized. Then after the Cold War, some things happened. One is that we have a vast reduction in the number of defense firms down to what we now call the defense primes, who have essentially become a cartel. For a long time, were essentially a cartel of doing technological change for the military, and that sort of ossified into this sort of very slow-moving innovation system Then the global war on terror came upon us. A lot of the innovation was around these small tactical problems, people trying to solve how to do counterinsurgency, how to optimize high-value targeting, et cetera. While all this was going on, we had the rise of peer competitors, namely China, in the background. And now, in 2024, we find ourselves still with this inherited, essentially, Cold War Department of Defense planning, programming, budgeting system, requirements process, et cetera, that is frankly too slow to deal with the needs for change that we see around us today. So that's kind of the background. Your cynical characterization is correct, that the DoD has woken up and realized that it's built itself a system that was optimized for the Cold War. It is not optimized for today's scenario, and it is scrambling to change.
So there's a lot of fun stuff there. When we think about innovation, everyone always thinks about technology first, but innovation can encompass a wide variety of things. What it sounds like you're describing is actually innovations and changes that would need to happen in our defense industrial base, how it's structured, but also within the Department of Defense, how it makes decisions, how it's organized, its ability to become more nimble. So almost a cultural or organizational innovation rather than a technological one.
I absolutely agree. I think the number one innovation that could occur across the DoD is to slow down and become more thoughtful about purpose, about understanding how we organize and incentivize and reward and punish people. And if we were to fix that, then leveraging emerging technology for national security would become easy. Technology will not save us. And people looking around for the new AI or the new robot that they think is going to be plugged into our current system and produce great national security, they're fooling themselves. The harder look is to look at our own organizations, culture, people, processes. And if we get that right, then leveraging AI or leveraging autonomous systems will become easy. That's my personal opinion.
You mentioned something there about slowing down the pace of innovation. We always think that innovation faster is better across the board. This is America. We innovate faster than anybody. It's always a race to the finish, and our only goal should just be outpace every competitor and leave them in the dust. But can you walk us through why you're saying that we need to slow down the pace of innovation? What are we giving up with our current rapid rate of innovation that we see in technology across the board?
Well, I think the bitter lesson that we have to go back and think about is actually the 90s and 2000s, when this drive for what used to be called, and you don't hear this term so much anymore, full spectrum dominance, where the United States would qualitatively outpace every competitor in every dimension of military capability and technology. What we essentially did in the 90s and 2000s was do most of the research and development for the current rise of China. We did it for free for them. And their capacity to fast follow, to reverse engineer, to now produce things that are nearly as good as ours, if not as good as ours, faster at larger scale, having done none of the R&D investment in it. They had a brilliant fast follower strategy that we enabled through, I would say, thoughtlessly implementing a lot of high technology that we could have researched and developed and withheld and not put out there. And the reason I bring this up is myself and a co-author, Jason Lepore, we wrote an article studying British naval force structure planning from the Crimean War to the First World War, in which they had the same problem, where they were the technological leaders vis-a-vis France, Germany, other competitors, but they had a very nuanced technology strategy where they would R&D new concepts, but only implement them when it made strategic sense for them, because they had this understanding that if they developed, let's say they were They were the system leaders in submarine technology. And if they implemented submarine technology at a wide scale, what they would do is diffuse that to the Germans, to the French, etc., which those people would mimic, and then degrade the effects of the British surface fleet. So they slowed down through the system. They slowed down submarine technology because it was not in their interest to excel at that technology at that time. And I think the United States could have learned a lot from the British in the 90s and 2000s. Unfortunately, we didn't. And I think now we're in the catch-up stage. But I think we also need to slow down and be thoughtful in another sense now, which is where we put our efforts, thinking about purpose, thinking about capability, and not just grabbing technology for its own sake.
Yeah. A couple follow-ups for that, but I'll start here. What you're describing with the British and what they were able to do, it seems like that would be almost impossible today, because we do live in this post-globalization world. Everything's interconnected. The DoD has divested almost all of its R&D functions to the top 5 defense contractors and a bunch of startups in Silicon Valley. We have the Defense Innovation Unit, which tries to do OTA contracts to rapidly get things from Silicon Valley into DoD. They try, at least. That works until they get sued by one of the major defense contractors. But if the U.S. government and the DoD is not driving the innovation, not funding the research, they don't have control over it, what mechanism could the U.S. possibly employ to even have that type of control, where we don't even own it domestically, much less have government control over where this innovation is happening?
Absolutely. You present a fantastic challenge. And actually, that article that Jason Lepore and I wrote in, I think, 2011, on the last page of the article, because in that article, our modeling of it, we assumed each state actor was a unitary rational actor. And in that sense, the government and defense industry were synonymous with each other. They were one single actor. And on the last page of that article, we said this is what the United States needs to figure out, is unpacking, making a new strategic relationship between the government and the defense industry. And that is work that we are working on now, because frankly, the U.S. government needs to, and I know this is a dirty word for sort of liberal economist, free market folks out there, but the United States needs a strategic and thoughtful industrial policy for fixing the defense industrial base. And that means culturally better understanding, shared understanding between the government, the DoD, national purpose, and what private sector companies are doing, how they see themselves in a globalized world, which that cultural disconnect between government and high-tech industry is pretty profound. People are finally waking up to the fact that it needs to be fixed, but that's one element. The other one being how the government can use its purchasing power, can rethink how it does purchasing and contracting to access and leverage cutting-edge emerging technology from smaller firms. Because once again, we've got this defense prime cartel, which we're finally waking up to the fact that we need to work around this defense prime cartel. And that's where you see your DIUs. That's why DIU was created, to try to access these smaller companies. But it is going to take a lot of work for the U.S. government to unpack this problem of waking up to the fact that innovation, technology, technology, which becomes potential innovations for the DoD, it's occurring in this sort of playpen of the private sector, which the DoD no longer has direct control over in the way that it did, let's say, during the Cold War. So that's a long-winded answer, but there needs to be thought and strategy put into how the DoD can better access American private sector ingenuity. Mm-hmm. And that became atrophied at the end of the Cold War and through the 90s and 2000s.
I mean, that It feels like that thread runs parallel to a whole bunch of other threads, and they all lead back to this other problem where America struggles to come up with a comprehensive national security strategy, and they put out a document, but an actual comprehensive grand strategy for the United States and how it exists in the world. And because we lack that organizing principle, we are not in a position to even have the type of mature conversation that you're describing that would help us organize our efforts around this topic and actually evaluate trade spaces.
Right.
Yeah.
The question of grand strategy is critical, and I teach a class on the political economy of strategic competition, and the first thing we talk about is grand strategy. So let's compare, let's say, the United States as a messy, bare knuckles democracy versus, let's say, an autocratic country like China or Russia, where they may have the capacity to have a more centralized, top-down vision and execution of grand strategy. And there's been debates going back to the 1950s in political science about which types of institutional arrangement does grand strategy better. And I think there's a case to be made both ways. And I can't credit this person because I cannot remember who said this to me, but when I was in grad school a long time ago, one of my professors made a great analogy, which I'll toss out here. They said an autocracy is like a sailboat. It looks nice, it's very clean, it's very efficient. You can sail a sailboat from, one point to another point very quickly and efficiently. That's great. And that's like an autocracy. The problem, though, is if the sailboat hits a rock, it sinks. It's relatively fragile. It's relatively brittle. A democracy is like a raft with a bunch of people on it who are rowing the raft in different directions at the same time. Everyone gets their feet wet. It's really hard to get from A to B. It's really hard to get consensus to get everybody to paddle in the same direction. But it doesn't sink. It tends to be relatively resilient. So this is something that we need to think about when we think about a shared purpose, about grand strategy, about really efficient orchestration of elements of power to support a grand strategy. Are we doing better or worse than a country like China? Sometimes it seems like we're doing a lot worse because they have, Xi can pick a point. He can knife hand all elements of national power and even all of society to move in that direction very quickly. The question is, if he picks the wrong direction, if he picks a massive pothole to drive his country into, he will drive his country into that pothole very quickly. In the United States, it's very hard for Biden or whoever the next president is to orchestrate everything to move very quickly in one direction. And that may slow us down from getting to good places better, but it also may prevent us from jumping into potholes very quickly. I know that's also a long-winded answer, but this is just something that we need to recognize. And like I said, there's a lot of research debating this going back at least to the 1950s. When the United States first found itself in the Cold War with the Soviet Union, a lot of political scientists chewed on this question. So,
yeah, well, with that, you could take that argument and almost come to a conclusion that maybe there isn't a problem after all, because if what we're saying is that we can iterate multiple times and not run into catastrophic problems, never hit zero, and China's one bad decision away from the game being over, is this actually an issue for us then, or do we just need to run out the clock?
You make a great point. So a lot of people, let's just focus on China for a second. A lot of people think that the United States is running people say that China's running this 100-year marathon. Maybe we're running the 100-year marathon, and our deep bet is on our institutions. And our institutions in the long run will prove to be more resilient, will prove to be more adaptive. We'll constantly be kicking ourselves for missed opportunities and not doing things fast enough, et cetera. But that our deep bet is that we muddle along, and we prove to be resilient. We have like the oldest democratic constitution in the world. We have always enjoyed our position of relative isolation here between two big oceans, and maybe we do our thing and just kind of play the long game. And China is under Xi is making big bets on things, and maybe that'll prove to be their undoing. There's a lot of smart people that make that argument. I don't think that precludes us from thinking hard about strategy along the way and doing the best we can, but we have to expect that we'll constantly be gnashing our teeth over the fact that the other guy seems to have an easier time of doing strategy than we do. How will it play out in the end? Your guess is as good as mine.
So what's it like when you have these students show up from all the services, special operations community, and you start teaching them some of these ideas? Like, are they well received? Do you get penetration and buy-in? Like, what's the initial reaction to these generally about to be majors or just pinned major officers who are coming here to get their master's education?
Our students are fantastic. We have like you said, our typical student is either a freshly minted major, or increasingly, and these are I wish we could get more of them, senior enlisted professionals who are just bring a totally different perspective, who are awesome. So we get these O4s or senior enlisted folks, some warrants coming in, and I gotta say, I'm thrilled with. First off, I've always been happy with our students, but I'm thrilled with our students that we're getting now, and I'll tell you why. Is when I first started at MPS in 2008, our students were all cycling in and out of the sandboxes of Iraq and Afghanistan. And they were coming to MPS. A lot of them were taking the time to reconnect to their families, to take a knee. I mean, those folks back then, as you know, those guys were doing back-to-back deployments, and they were just run to the ground. So those guys came to MPS, and partly they took a knee, and then partly they were trying to figure out how many cups of tea to drink with a Pashtun tribal elder, right? So their focus, we'd have guys coming in being like, well, I'm going to write my thesis on Afghanistan, but not Hindu Kush. I'm only focused on Helmand Province. Like their world was such a tiny soda straw of what they were looking at, of high value targeting or handing out soccer balls or digging wells or whatever, but it was all within this very truncated sandbox of Afghanistan. And now we have these folks coming, a new generation of SOF professionals who are realizing that SOF's role in the age of strategic competition is global, truly global, spans domains. They need to understand economics. They need to understand the implications of China's One Belt, One Road initiative. They need to understand that allies and partners means more than just putting some dude from another country in the back of the helicopter when you go do a raid. But now it actually is important for them to understand how another society functions, how another military apparatus functions, because this is actually going to be critical to helping secure the United States under global strategic competition. So the other fact is now we have components, soft components. Particularly, I'm going to point out naval special warfare, understanding that for 20 years they've been jumping out of helicopters in the desert, and now they have to get back in the water to support the fleet, and that's going to require a whole lot of transformation, tech change, innovation, etc. So we have all these NSW students coming in, tackling these really interesting problems around integration of autonomous systems, human-machine teaming, position, navigation, and timing, wanting to understand how satellites work. So this totally new generation of SOF operators who are thinking in a really much broader aperture than students had to think in 2008 or 2010. So, like I said, those old students were doing exactly the right thing for where they were in history, and these new students are jumping headfirst into what they need to accomplish for their place in history. So the students are awesome.
Okay. Let me ask you about this. What's your sense of how much penetration those students get with those ideas when they go back to the operational force? Because what I've seen from my own time in service, and my friends tell me still the way it works, you can actually derail your career by taking 18 months to go get a master's degree in a very significant way. It costs you 2 officer evaluation reports. You mentioned the whole taking a knee thing. There are places you go back to the operational force, at least I know in the Army on the regular side and special operations side, where you will be looked down upon by your chain of command by the fact that you took time off while they were still off working and deploying, and you might have all this brilliant knowledge, but you are now the black sheep. You have the scarlet letter, and you do not recover, and you just off-ramp your entire career. You certainly will not take battalion command at pin a star one day. That's not everywhere, but I've seen it be more true than not. So I'm just kind of curious, what is the actual effect in the operational force? Have you seen any when these students go back and start plying their trade again?
That's a fantastic point. Like I said, it's when we step back to what we talked about a few minutes ago, what's the number one thing I think that is going to be critical for the United States to innovate, transform, et cetera, for strategic competition is looking hard inside of itself in terms of culture and incentives. And you hit the nail on the head. And I'll tell you, I just had a former student, SF guy, came to NPS, got a dual degree in space systems operations and our department defense analysis. He designed, prototyped, and tested a CubeSat to solve globally distributed soft communication challenges like a nerd. And he just got picked up for battalion command in SF. So I'm super proud of him, and I'm super... I sense that these soft components now realize that just having dudes do pumps in Afghanistan and Iraq and schwack high-value targets and blah, 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 turning the crank, that is no longer the way of the world. The new way of the world is hopefully leveraging these men and women to come to a place like MPS or other civil schooling, let's say, do real research, actively leverage that research and that time that student is being educated, not as time away from the force, but as a value added to their organization, as a place for that student to test out new ideas, to prototype concepts or a technology, and to have that be highly valued, tracked, and brought back into the organization at the end of their time. And we're starting to see a culture change in the soft components where they see these folks going off to NPS and other places and saying, those students are doing something valuable for our community by being personally educated and professionally developed. But we can also strategically leverage them by giving them a topic or a challenge that's of interest to our organization, providing them some minimal resources for travel or whatever they need to do their project, track it, give them guidance along the way, and be waiting for them to finish. So they not only come back better educated, but they're bringing back a project that is of value to our organization. To me, this is the next ridgeline for, officer and senior NCO education, is not just that the person leaves and goes away from the force and gets professionally developed and get some personal, get something that's good for them individually in terms of earning a master's degree, but they're considered a strategic asset that goes off and contributes to the force through their education. And I'm hoping that's going to be a big culture change for for the soft community, that they really recognize and leverage that this is not just good for the individual, it's good for the organization.
It's encouraging to hear that there's been some success in that in the soft community. That's genuinely encouraging. What's your sense? I don't know if you've seen anything like this at all, but what about the other services on the regular side? Because SOF is its own branch. They work more with each other than they do with their own home branches. But between the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, what has their take on this education, this strategic mindset? What have they been doing?
I'm going to admit ignorance. I rarely interact with the conventional side,
Okay.
so to speak. So I'm hoping it's the same. I think there's, here's the issue. as you know, like when you said you first saw the article that I wrote on innovation, you were like, oh my gosh, another buzzword, innovation. And why are people sick of it? Because across the DoD, there's a lot of innovation theater going on. And a lot of it, if you read stories, if you see stuff, it's like...
I like that. Innovation theater. I'm stealing that.
Yeah.
I like that phrase. I'm writing it down.
I think that comes from Stephen Blank, I think came up with that at up at Stanford. So I think that's where you can credit that.
Cool.
You know, some E4 somewhere developed a new thing and it's like he solved some problem for his platoon or whatever. That innovation occurring at the grassroots level across the joint force is this sort of theatrical thing where, Corporal Snuffy invents a new sort of whatever, straps for his backpack or something like that. And it's featured on the cover of on the front page of some website, military PAO website thing, which is great. I'm not detracting from Corporal Snuffy in that case, but this middling issue, this middle range that goes from, innovation theater at the bottom, which is like just people doing one-off things that end up on a PAO website that lead to nothing. They don't get scaled up. At the top, you have the defense primes, which are trying to develop the new, fighter aircraft or whatever. The middle of the space is where the action needs to be, where you actually are fostering grassroots innovation, but at a level where innovative ideas are recognized, evaluated, harvested, and scaled up to where they need to be across the service or the joint force. That's this middle range that the DoD is trying to figure out now, is how do you turn your O4s or your E5s into these sensors, for new opportunities, new challenges, good idea generators, but in a way that the big machine can actually leverage and scale up good ideas where it sees them. This is the real challenge. And I think education opportunities and having students go off to get a master's is a great place for low risk, low cost of getting those middling people of your force. Because an O4 or an E6, those are people that are sort of at the top of the tactical level of warfare, right? Mm-hmm. Like they got some experience, they've seen things out in the field, they know how things work. If they come up with an idea, it's probably pretty thoughtful. But how does the machine identify, harvest, and scale that up to where they need to? That's the tough thing for the DoD right now. And I think education opportunities like NPS is a place where the services, if they get their heads right, they can send people off to get individually educated and developed, but use that experience as this incubator of mid-range innovation, that if something good comes out of it, they can kick it into the more systematic acquisition, innovation machinery, if that makes sense. So once again, back to your original question, I think SOF has a relative advantage in this space because of their slightly higher risk acceptance, slightly because of their selection and training, they have slightly more mature folks. SOF is globally distributed around the world, so they have access to more places to try things out. Not to say that the conventional forces can't do those things, but I think SOF has a slight advantage in this area. But I really hope the entire joint force starts to recognize education as a place to turn this into this mid-range, this engine of mid-range innovation, so to speak.
Okay. I wanted to ask about one of the articles that you wrote and pull together a couple of threads here that we just went over about SOF and innovation and partner forces. One of the things that we've seen, and I saw you reference it in some of your writing, is that our focus on high-end technology allows us to develop all these wonderful capabilities that there's really no way to give to a partner force. I had a 12-man special forces team. We could clear rooms like crazy. We had all this whiz-bang stuff. Doesn't help train 100 Afghans to go do it if they can't have access to the same equipment. And we're almost hamstringing our ability to partner with them when we rely on different types of technology, different types of communications platforms. as we do go to this era of global competition and we need to partner with more people around the world to reduce our own risk, how do we understand the use of technology and its place in that relationship? And do we get too distracted by the big shiny object?
Absolutely. I think solving this problem is absolutely critical for our nation's security, and then for SOF's role in strategic competition, because I think they have a comparative advantage in this space. So a couple things. One is, probably the biggest tragedy of the war in Afghanistan was the billions upon billions of dollars we wasted trying to develop Afghan forces, which we were utterly shocked, same way we were shocked at the end of the Vietnam War, of the utter collapse of our partner force that we had spent an ungodly amount of money to develop, and just watch them collapse like a paper tiger, because we spent our time mirror imaging a force to try to reconstruct it as a mirror image of how we think a military should be and operate, completely neglecting their culture, their aptitude and capabilities of their people, and their security needs. As one senior colleague of mine, Hy Rothstein, always said, our security force assistance and foreign internal defense efforts in Afghanistan turned the world's greatest warriors into the world's worst soldiers. And we saw that with the rapid, complete collapse of the Afghans. And same thing with Iraq, right? We were giving the Iraqi forces, fixed-wing aircraft and M1 Abrams tanks, and their military was overrun in a short order by ISIS on the back of Hilux pickup trucks. And so we've seen this play out time and time again. So I think there's a couple of threads here that I would like to pull, at least four. So one is myself and Philip Swintek and General Langle just published an article, particularly referencing RSOF, saying that, besides all this whiz-bang technology stuff, we cannot move away from the fact that the SOF community in general, and the RSOF community in particular, one of their superpowers is relationship building. And all the AI in the world, all the robots in the world are not going to make up for the fact that we still need to build and maintain relationships around the world. And that, I think, is RSOF's super special power, and something that really needs to be valued as a contribution to strategic competition. That's not just about coin and drinking 3 cups of tea. That's about steady state strategic competition stuff. Another thread that we want to pull there is the fact that we need to move away from mirror imaging, of dumping second-rate, American equipment onto partner forces when it does not meet their security needs. They can't maintain it. And oftentimes their soldiers in the field don't have access to it. As you may have seen, I wrote an article with a Filipino force recon Marine who was talking about the Battle of Marawi, saying that the ISIS forces at the Battle of Marawi oftentimes had better short-range reconnaissance with drones because they were buying like Hello Kitty drones off Amazon, and the Filipino forces were being offered or being gifted Puma and Raven drones, which they were not allowed to use because their commanders said, we cannot break the drone that the Americans gave us, right? And so this Force Recon Marine, Filipino Force Recon Marine, came to MPS and prototyped a basic mil-spec drone using commercial off-the-shelf components to actually fill the security need, because what the Americans were giving them was not sustainable and not usable at the tactical level. So really understanding what these forces need. And if we had a follow-on student who was a Filipino Army colonel came on as a student following on, and he took that drone that the Recon Marine had developed and he built a payload for it, which was a friend versus foe identifier. So that little drone could fly above the tree line to mark the forward line of combat between friend and foe to allow Filipino fixed-wing aircraft to provide close air support and not kill their own folks. So this is an example of innovation that we could enable at the Naval Postgraduate School to allow these Filipino military professionals to actually do grassroots innovation that was tailored exactly to their needs. So I think that's a second piece of this. I think another piece of this is the fact that it's not just about military stuff. We have some great students. I just took some students to Thailand to observe Cobra Gold, and one of the students was writing about.
What's Cobra Gold?
Cobra Gold is a U.S. Army First Corps multinational exercise conducted annually in Thailand. And so we took some students there, and one of the students wrote about sustainability, which is that climate change and sustainability, which in the United States, we sort of kind of care about it. But if you're in Philippines or Thailand or Indonesia, some of these countries are really, so to speak, on the front lines of global climate change. They're very vulnerable. Food insecurity, typhoons, flooding, all of these implications of global climate change, that's very real to them, even though it's very peripheral for us. And we're more interested in countering Chinese influence. They're more interested in, or just as interested in, combating global climate change and its implications. So that provides an inroad for us to engage in partnered innovation in a way that actually shows that we're listening to their needs. And so if we're producing something on, let's say, sustainable hydroponic gardening, which I just wrote an article on with a Marine officer, hydroponic gardening could help sustain U.S. expeditionary troops distributed across Indo-PACOM AOR when lines of communication are down or lines of logistics are down for the United States. But putting that technology out there and sustaining it on the periphery is also a way to help partner forces combat food insecurity. So this is, I think, these are all ways that taking allies and partners seriously, and I know we waved hands at it all through the global war on terror, but it really was not taken seriously. I mean, in my opinion, was not taken seriously. It was like get an Afghan on the back of the helicopter so we can say this is an Afghan raid on a high-value target. This is not that. We need actual empathy and actual dealing with allies and partners as true collaborators. And I think our young officers and NCOs that are coming through our program are very hip to this. They get this, that they need, that we are no longer automatically the partner of choice for allies and partners around the world. We need to re-earn that moniker. And the way that we do it is being true collaborators, being truly empathetic, and really listening. And I think the SOF community and RSOF in particular should be taking the lead on that.
Awesome. Yeah, the approach to partner force operations in Afghanistan definitely left much to be desired in a lot of situations. There were units who were somewhat infamous for, they'd go after a high-value target, they'd bring the Afghans with them, they'd stop a valley early, they'd kick all the Afghans off the bird, it's like, we'll pick you up on the way back, then they go hit the target, then they come back and pick up the Afghans because it was easier just to run a unilateral operation than to bring the Afghans along. And yeah, it was literally just so they could say it was a partnered operation to comply with the rules of engagement at the time.
Exactly. You hit the nail on the head.
Yeah. Okay. And I'm thinking about the example of the F-35 and the Joint Strike Fighter and the F-22 and the Air Force constantly trying to get rid of the A-10 and not being allowed to. Also reminds me of the light attack program that the Air Force almost funded. Then they kicked over to SOCOM for a low-cost prop plane that you could actually give to partner forces to be sustainable, and also so we could support ourselves in far-flung places where you don't have big airstrips. And the amount of resistance to, I just saw an article the other day, they're cutting the fleet down from like 75 to 63 aircraft. And it's like, this is the most obvious, cheap, low-cost innovation to actually support ground forces. And the ground forces are asking for it, and we can't get the Air Force to actually back it up, and even SOCOM's budget's being cut for it. And that kind of bureaucratic infighting amongst the services is just so frustrating to watch.
That's right. And I'm going to speak out of turn here, and you can research this, but I believe that when you talk about those really low-cost prop planes being used for close air and resupplying close air support in Afghanistan. I believe that project started with 2 NPS students as a master's thesis. And this can go back and be researched. And I'm not going to say their names because I don't want to say their names, but one of them, I just remember his call sign was Lunchbox. But they, from what I understand, and this needs to be verified, but I believe I was not their thesis advisor, but I remember them as students that they went off to Alaska to bush pilot school. To Alaskan bush pilots, of course, are used to flying in rough terrain and landing and flying in all sorts of conditions that Air Force pilots are not trained to. So from what I understand, these students went off, did Alaskan bush pilot training, and they were the ones that helped spearhead this idea of having that Alaska bush pilot mentality to having small, slow flying, rugged aircraft in a place like Afghanistan. And the Air Force hated it. Right, because the Air Force, even though this entire program would cost less than the fuzzy dice on the rearview mirror of an F-22, the Air Force hated it. And this, for years, this is when you talk about, so yes, we've written some articles on this that everyone likes innovation and everyone likes to take on new things and acquire new stuff. But the big problem is to pay for new stuff, you need to go after some sacred cows.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of really expensive sacred cows, aircraft carriers, manned fixed wing air superiority aircraft. If you just, those two items is basically like a huge chunk of the defense budget. Yep. Those are extremely sacred cows, but you can't get all this new whiz bang stuff. You can't free yourself up when combat survivability for pilots in combat aircraft and all of the systems that are designed to protect an aircraft carrier, not just the aircraft carrier itself, but all the systems and assets to protect that platform, all of the money that goes into fixed wing aircraft that's focused on pilot survivability, these are phenomenal amounts of money. Right. And if you actually question those sacred cows and say, wow, if we could go to autonomous combat aircraft or remotely piloted combat aircraft versus manned ones, because that's going to make costs extraordinarily low, you're going after a real sacred cow in the pilot community. If you go after aircraft carriers, wow. I've written a couple things where I talk about questioning the role of aircraft carriers. I'm at a naval school. That turns some heads, but that's, you can't, there's only so much money in the world. We can only print so much money. So if you're going to buy some new stuff, you've got to go after some sacred cows. And buddy, that's a tough proposition.
Yeah. I remember when the Army, actually had an honest conversation about the efficacy of airborne troops. And this conversation lasted all of about 90 days and went nowhere, as all good conversations do. But yeah, looking at, so there's a great argument to be made for maintaining a static line infiltration capability at the small unit level for resupply, all sorts of stuff. But then someone actually just did the math and said, hey, we've got 5 airborne brigade combat teams in the Army. We don't have enough aircraft to drop them all at the same time.
And we're never going to drop them into a contested space because they'll all be killed on the way down. And what we'll do is that we land them on an airfield we already own. So why are we paying to train them all to jump out of airplanes, So we have a student, 2 guys, they wrote a great thesis questioning large-scale static line drop, because they're like, we're never going to use it in a contested environment. We're never going to do like D-Day airborne landings again because we're not going to take the casualties. We're going to take the airfield and land them in an airplane and they're going to get out. And then why are we training them to do static line jumping? And so we have students tackle all these questions, but if you go after airborne community, man, you're in for it. So, and I'm not saying we should get, once again, Leo's opinion. I don't know enough to say that we should get rid of like static line jump for 82nd or whatever. That's not what I'm saying. But these are the kind of hard choices and hard debates that students in these master's programs can get at in a very low risk way to really help push the debates forward. And that's something that is both about proposing new innovative things and also really questioning sacred cows throughout the force structure. And that's what we need, some tough conversations around these things moving forward.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a good spot in the narrative arc to wrap it up, but this has been an incredibly enjoyable conversation. Really appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything else you'd like to share with the audience before we shut it off?
No, thank you so much for having me. I think folks like you are really doing a service to the national security debate at this point, because few people read social scientific journals that deal with national security issues.
They're not page turners.
They're not page turners. No one reads the 500-page white papers being churned out behind the scenes. Online publications and podcasts are the place where I think vibrant conversations are taking place around national security. And I think you are on the front line battleground of debating where our nation needs to go in terms of securing itself. So thank you for having me, and thank you for doing this podcast.
Oh, my pleasure. If people want to find your work, where can they go?
Just Google me. I have a couple books out, and a bunch of articles, and people can just Google my name and find stuff. So
cool. There'll be links to some of that in the show notes for everyone listening. Appreciate you, man.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for listening in today. If you liked what you heard, please follow the podcast and share with your friends, and even consider going to the support the show link in the episode description. Thank you, and I'll see you all next time.